everyone. Before we begin today, we want to give a huge shout out to our newest patrons, Phoebe and Lily. Welcome to the team. If you want to be like them and get access to all kinds of bonus content, head on over to patreon.com/pod and prejudice. We also want to acknowledge that it's been an extremely difficult week, especially for people with uteruses, and we just want our podcast to continue to be a source of joy and an escape and a safe and welcoming place for all of you. We believe that art and literature are sacred spaces for us to gather together and find community, and we hope that we're still giving you all some joy and a little solace. With that being said, enjoy our coverage of this final part of the 2008 Sense and Sensibility with our guests, Zoe and Kelsey of Tea and Strumpets.
This is Becca.
This is Molly.
We are here to talk about Jane Austen.
We are here specifically to finally finish our coverage of the 2008 Sense and Sensibility. We are here joined today again by Zoe and Kelsey from Tea and Strumpets. Hello, and welcome back.
Hi. Thank you for having us.
We're happy to have you guys back. If you guys want to know a little bit about Tea and Strumpets and all the work that Zoe and Kelsey do, you should definitely check out our previous podcasts where they discuss it at length. I wouldn't start a rewatch of 2008 Sense and Sensibility at the last episode. So I recommend you going to the beginning of this piece of the podcast anyway. But while you're at it, you might as well go and listen to the whole podcast. But if you specifically want to know stuff about Zoe and Kelsey, that's where you'll find it halfway through our coverage of the 2008 Sense and Sensibility.
I feel like it's fun to think about, people coming into Sense and Sensibility halfway through. And you would think no one would do that. But I want to say that my girlfriend did do that because I had to finish watching the 1995 and I was at her house. And so she just popped it on. She doesn't know anything about Jane Austen. This was the first time that we were watching it. And she was like, what's happening?
My husband came in and out when I was watching the miniseries, the Pride and Prejudice miniseries. And there were a lot of what's going on kind of moments from him.
I was impressed when I sat down to watch this. My husband watched the whole thing with me.
Yes.
He didn't pop in and out. He was invested. Although sometimes he wasn't paying attention. He was like, wait, what's happening? What is this girl doing? Why is she crying?
They're on another walk. Where are they?
Who's this guy again?
They're all named Fitzwilliam. Help.
Everyone is named Fitzwilliam or John.
Yeah. So speaking of people named John, well, not really, but we should just dive right back into the final part of the 2008 Sense and Sensibility. So where we left off, listeners, Marianne was just crying in Mrs. Ferrer's home, and Mrs. Ferrer's was like, what's wrong with that girl? And Fanny was like, it's Willoughby. And it was very sinister, gossipy. So where we pick up, we cut to Lucy coming to see Elinor at her little apartment in London. And she's like, oh my gosh, I love Mrs. Ferrers. That was such a great night last night. And Elinor was like, really? Because, I mean, she made it pretty clear that she wants Edward to marry Miss Morton. And Lucy very pointedly says, it's me he's made his promise to, not her or anybody else.
Staking that claim. Yeah, I really loved Lucy's just diving in, sucking up to Mrs. Ferris, and everything they said was about Miss Morton.
Yep.
Every single thing.
Yep. And it goes over her head a little bit. She's aware, but she's like, nope, this is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she really thought it doesn't matter about Miss Morton as long as they like me, because then I have a leg up in the future with, Mrs. Ferris.
See, I had this thing in my head where I was like, she's just comparing what they say about her to what they say about Elinor.
Ah.
Have you ever had a person in your life who knows you like a boy or a girl and is like, oh, did you see them throw themselves at me?
No, thankfully, no.
Oh, well, my high school experience was marked by some not nice girls. And that is how they operate. They're like, oh, he was just all over me last night. It was kind of embarrassing, as if they don't know how you feel. And I felt like Lucy was doing that.
Yep.
Oh man, she just liked me so much. She just liked me so much.
I just remembered I had a friend in 5th grade who would do this so much, and not just with boys. She would come over to my house. I feel like I've talked about this on the podcast before because she's just so these villains. She would come over to my house and she would be like, how was your weekend? And I would be like, it was good. And then she would be like, aren't you going to ask me how my weekend was? And I was like, okay, how was your weekend? And she would be like, oh, well, I hung out with this person and this person, like people that I was friends with. And she like wanted to make sure I knew that they were hanging out without me. And I was like, oh, okay, so you're Lucy Steele. Yes, got it.
I mean, like, I experienced that too, but I wasn't even privy to it. It would be more like they would just be in class talking about all the fun they had together over the weekend. I'd be like, cool, 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 cool.
Cool, cool, cool.
Kids are the worst.
Yeah, that's like everyone finds the moment in their life to shed the toxic people.
Mhm.
And once you do, you're like, "Oh, okay. This
Mhm.
is what like true friendship is. You don't want anything else like anywhere near the realm of this sort of petty competitiveness."
Oh, yeah, no. I will say I haven't had to compete with my friends in a long time, and also when someone does come in and I get that competition vibe, I'm like, "I'm not competing with you. I honestly don't care." So I'm very confused as to why you think this is a competition and you need to, like, badmouth me because honestly, seems a little unnecessary. Clearly, you've got some things to work on there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of competition, they're sitting there and Edward comes in and he like grabs Eleanor's hands and Eleanor's like, wait, wait, I'm sure you know Miss Lucy Steele. And he's like, uh, yes, hello. How are
You
you?
see the record scratch go across his face.
So uncomfortable. And Eleanor is so uncomfortable and she's like, I'm gonna go get Marianne. And she goes to the door, but then Marianne pops in and she is so excited to see Edward. And she's like, well, haven't you come to see us yet? And he's like, oh, I had other engagements. And Marianne is like, what? Like, we're your best friends. And then that's when we get Lucy Steele saying, perhaps you think young men never stand upon their engagements. And Marianne is like, well, Edward always keeps his word when he has given it. Every time this line happens in any adaptation slash in the book, it hits me how, like, on the nose it is, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, he does always keep his word when he has given it, doesn't he?" It hits different every time.
You're like, "If only you weren't so noble."
Yeah. It's like, and I wanna be like, "I hate you, but I really don't." And Edward is like, "Yes, I do keep my engagements, and that being so, I gotta go because I forgot it. I promised my sister I would, come to her house. Bye." And then Lucy is like, "Okay, well, I'll go with you." And then she leaves with him. But cut to Anne, Fanny, and Mrs. Ferrars in the Ferrars household. Little Henry is playing with toys. Oh, this is the moment. It's not related to the plot, but we have to talk about it. There's a bowl of what appear to be gold nuggets.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Mrs. Ferrars just picks one up and crunches into it with her teeth. And it's like an almond or something, but it's gold plated and it just looks like she's eating rocks. And I just think that's really on brand for her.
I did see that, and I was just like I did notice all the gold, like, onto everything, and I'm like, "Oh, so you're just, like, showcasing your wealth. That doesn't even look good. That just
No.
is a total that's a power play. That's all that is."
Did you guys ever have those, like, if you went to Cape Cod or something and they sold chocolate rocks in little jars and they, like, were chocolate, but they were coated in candy and made to look like they were rocks?
I have had chocolate rocks before. They had those at, like, because 'cause we're obviously not near Cape Cod, having never been to Cape Cod. But they did have that, like, at the since I'm in Northern California, the heart of the California Gold Rush, when you go to, like, the train museum or, like, any museum or with people who are, like, a part of the gold rush, they'd have, like, big chunks of candy rocks.
Yeah. So basically, Mrs. Ferrars went to one of those museums and she got a thing of gold rocks
Yeah.
and is just munching.
Has anybody here had like edible gold before?
No.
No.
I feel like I have, but I don't have like a memory of it. So I feel like I can't confirm nor deny.
So it's like really thin because to eat gold safely, it has to be like pounded down really, really
Oh,
hard,
yeah.
which is why it's like only a thin coating on things. It has little to no taste, and the taste that is there doesn't really add anything to the dish. So if you're eating gold, you have there is nothing to it except for the fact that you want to poop gold later.
Well, no, but that's the crazy thing. So, like, you also get into the fact, like, now I'm older and it's like, when people are like, "Oh, yeah, and there's gold leaf on this," and I'm like, our bodies don't like to expel metal, right? Like, the metal just likes to hang out in your body and stay there forever. So why are you eating that? That sounds like a bad idea.
I was gonna say though, I've definitely had Goldschlager, and I think that
Oh,
that
there
has
you
some
go.
gold in it.
I've had that does have gold in it. That's the whole point. I've had that
Wait,
too.
what is that?
It's essentially cinnamon schnapps with gold flecks in it.
Yeah.
Oh my god, yum.
Shameful moment on my end. The reason I know what it is because of the movie Superbad.
Well, I was gonna say you also find it in Superbad. It's part of the main plot.
Nice.
I was actually at the store and I was like looking for a cordial and I was like searching, and I like came across the Goldschlag and I was like, ha.
Now I need to try that. That should be on our next. We have to do a cocktail video for our patrons. So
Ooh.
patrons, Becca and I will try Goldschlag,
Goldschlager.
Goldschlager on the Patreon.
There you go.
So they're hanging out, Fanny and Anne and Mrs. Ferrers, and Anne lets slip. She's like, "Oh, well, we've seen Edward very often. He comes to visit us in Plymouth all the time." And Fanny's like, "Well, why would he come visit you in Plymouth?" And you can tell that Fanny knows that Anne's not paying attention to what she's saying because the way she's looking at her. And Anne is like, "Well, he comes to see Lucy, of course." And then she pulls a Hagrid and she's like, "I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have told you that." And she's so funny when she does it and she starts crying. And
Oh my God.
Fanny is like,
Her whole face, like that actress is like amazing because you just see her. They say like you can see their face crumple,
mhm.
and that's exactly what her face did. Her whole face just like crumpled when she like admitted it. She's like, "Oh, this is a disaster." It's so melodramatic, and the facial acting is just so amazing. Oh, loved it.
It's so good. And then, as if on cue, Edward and Lucy come in, and is it Mrs. Fair? She's like, "Is it true that you two are together?" And Lucy looks at Anne and she's like, "What did you do?" And then Anne is just sobbing and she's like, "I'm sorry, it just popped out," which is my favorite line in the whole thing.
Yeah.
Quick side note here, just for a little fun fact from the book's perspective, one of the ways you know Lucy Steele is ultimately a villain is at the end of the book, she like flings Anne out into poverty and
Mhm.
she like doesn't give her anything
Aw, poor Anne.
as punishment for her slip of the tongue.
Ugh,
Yep.
awful.
So Mrs. Ferrers says that if Edward doesn't abandon this ridiculous plan, he will have nothing from her. And the camera work here is very much like it's zooming in on her face. And she's like, "If you do not abandon this ridiculous plan," it's very in the 1995 Pride and Prejudice when the camera zooms in on Lady Catherine and she goes, "All five out at once." It's the same exact camera work onto the older lady villain. So shout out Andrew Davies for that one. Then she tells him that he can like starve on the streets and Lucy's not welcome there anymore. And Edward's like, "Well, if you're kicking out Lucy, then I'm going too." And she says, "Okay, great, bye." And the sad music swells and we see Lucy also like on her face kind of like calculating, "Oh my god, I've got nothing now. What am I going to do?" Then we cut to Elinor sitting alone on her bed staring out the window and Marianne comes in and she's like, "How long have you known this?" Now, I was kind of sad that we missed them finding out that Lucy and Edward are together because in the 1995 and also in the book, I believe, Mrs. Jennings finds out first and like runs around town telling everyone.
Yeah.
So here we just like this movie does it a lot where they like cut to the consequence of the thing and we don't see the thing itself. Like it happens again later with the "Oh, Mr. Colonel Brandon has a favor to ask you," and then we cut to Eleanor and Edward having a conversation about the living. Like we don't
Mhm.
actually get to see that conversation happen.
Well, we had to make room for Zoe's favorite scene, the duel.
Yeah, exactly. The duel took precedence, okay?
Yes, the duel, of course, totally. So, Marianne is like, "How can you possibly bear this?" And Eleanor says she hopes he's very happy. Marianne says, "Then you must not have felt so much for him after all." And then Eleanor has like one single tear, like single tear emoji. And she says she's suffered all the punishments of an attachment without enjoying any of the advantages. end quote, "I might not have shown it, Marianne, but let me assure you I have been very unhappy." And I thought this moment was so sweet because it's not like in the 95 when Elinor is, like, crying and yelling at Marianne a little bit and is like it's just like she's actually admitting that she feels emotions differently and she's, like, really holding them in, and I really like it.
This was actually my favorite scene because, like, I just, like I became Eleanor in that moment. Like, I'm such a bottler, and it's just, like, I would bottle things up and, like, not let it show. And then, of course, to have my sister, like, poke and prod me and be like, "It must not mean anything because you're like, why are you not, like, flinging yourself around?" And she's like, "I just don't do that." But it's such a sister bonding moment because it really shows Eleanor actually have that breakdown and show that raw feeling to her sister who is of the romantic mind. And so, of course, she's like, "Oh my god, like, I thought it was bad for me. Like, my poor sister has just been suffering in silence this whole time." And I just thought it was such a good, beautiful sister bonding moment. And I loved that scene. It was actually one of my favorites in the movie.
I totally agree with what you have to say, Kelsey. And I think that this scene, as I've said before, I have a preference for the 95 version over this version. But I think this scene was one where, like, I wouldn't say the other kind of moment between Marianne and Elinor in the 95 was better. I thought like this one, I wouldn't say this one was better either, but I thought they both like were like I love this scene in general, like where you have this really tender moment between these two sisters kind of understanding each other because I think, you know, Elinor gets Marianne, right? She gets her because Marianne is more open, but Marianne doesn't get Elinor as much. And so it really is this kind of window into them understanding each other. And I agree. I thought it was like such a powerful scene and a beautiful moment.
Mhm. I agree that this one isn't, like, better than the 95 in any way in particular, but what I did appreciate about this scene more than, this scene in the 95 is that at the end of the scene in the 95, Marianne starts crying in a very, like, "I'm
Mm.
upset that you just yelled at me" kind of way,
Mm.
and Eleanor ends up having to comfort her, and in this one, Marianne is just, like, really affected by what Eleanor says, and she comforts Eleanor, and I think that that's what Eleanor needed in this moment.
I don't remember exactly that scene. So now you've refreshed my memory. So yeah, that I prefer this one a little bit in that respect. I also think that the actress who plays Marianne, I think this is her best moment
Oh, yeah.
in the whole series too.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Sense and Sensibility, my personal opinion is that the men are great, but this is really like the sisters are the story in every sense and
Yeah.
Mhm.
sensibility.
But
Yeah. But I think that when it comes to adaptations, I have certain opinions about what absolutely must be done correctly. Like, for another example, like I really loved the book Big Little Lies, and I thought the TV show didn't do everything perfectly, but I thought they did correctly what needed to be done correctly. And I think with Sense and Sensibility, what needs to be done correctly is the relationship between Eleanor and Marianne. And it is just so nailed in this scene.
Mhm.
The actors do such a good job. And like you really you see the complexities of being sisters and loving each other, but being different. So, frankly, in this scene. And I think what's interesting about this is that this is actually almost word for word from the book.
Mm.
This is like the speech Eleanor gives in the book, where for me, the 95 speech Eleanor gives, the "For weeks, Marianne, I've had this pressing on me," is, like, burned into my brain.
Mhm.
So, I find it to be it's like the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet. It's like the scene you have to do right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Oh, no, it makes total sense to me. Having not read the book, I don't know, but, I really felt that this was one of, like, the highlights of the whole thing for me was, like, literally that scene, that moment, and a lot of like, almost in that moment, I was able to forgive Marianne all her annoying qualities for the rest of the series because, like, in that moment, it finally clicked in her brain, and she was like, "Oh, I need to not be the child here."
And in a way, it's kind of like now that I'm thinking about you're talking about like the balcony scene and it being so pivotal and important. In a way, this is almost the central conflict resolution of the book,
Mhm.
right? Like Marianne and Elinor are understanding each other for the first time on both sides. So this is the conflict resolution we've been kind of waiting for. And so it almost feels like a climax in a way too of its own, because like you've got different love stories, but some of them haven't even really started. So, I mean,
Mhm.
sort of. Really interesting to think about, but yeah, I'm so there with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then Charlotte has her baby, and Mrs. Jennings is like, okay, we're going to go to Cleveland. By the way, the Colonel has a favor to ask you, Eleanor. And then that's when we cut to Edward and Eleanor having this conversation. So we skip over the Colonel asking her to ask him, which is a whole thing. And then we have her offering the living to Edward. And Edward is like, what? Really? Why? And they're standing 8 feet apart, which I think is hilarious. They're not sitting, they're just like standing there looking at each other.
It's like a basically empty room and they're like thriving in a 2020 sort of look.
Yeah.
Oh, very much. And Edward is like, well, I must have you to thank for this." And she's like, "No, no, it's your own merit." What I realize is that in this scene, in the 95 and in the book, maybe not in the 95, but in the book, this scene for me was like him starting to think, "Oh, wait, does she like the Colonel? Are they a thing? Is that why they're doing this? Are they in love?" And earlier in this adaptation, I thought that they were gonna lean into the Eleanor and Brandon thing,
Mhm.
and they didn't in this scene. Edward is clearly so sure of her feelings for him and not at all jealous, and I actually really appreciated that, and I really loved this scene. They, like, get to have their conversation. He's like, "Why don't you think badly of me?" And she's like, "You never deceived me." She says one of my favorite lines is, I wouldn't think so highly of you if you had acted differently." Because he stuck to his word. He is a man of honor. She's a woman of honor. Yeah, and I get it now, and I love this scene for them that they get to actually, like, talk about their feelings because 'cause they're the 2 people who I think talk about their feelings the least in this story.
I did appreciate the feeling talking. As anyone who has ever listened to our podcast, my biggest rant and rave is like, if only they had had an open and honest conversation. I am not for misunderstandings. I think if they hadn't had this conversation and really like solidified like that she wasn't mad at him, you could have written a whole other book about the saga of Eleanor and Edward having a misunderstanding and like finally getting their heads out of their own asses. But because they had this beautiful open and honest conversation, like, and I felt like you could still really feel Eleanor's hurt in what she was saying, but she was also like very determined. Like, I think in a way it was like her way of showing the hurt without like becoming Marianne, in
Mhm.
that moment. Like she's like
Mhm.
still very poised and put together, but she's just like, I don't think this of you. Like, in fact, like it's part of why I admired you. And it almost like reassures me that I wasn't wrong to admire you.
Mhm.
So
Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure our listeners will do so if Becca doesn't, but I don't think that at this point they have this conversation in the book.
They are not this open and honest in the book with each other, but I do agree that this is a great scene for open and honest conversation because I think it does reflect one of the points of the book
Right.
that is hard to pick up on if you're not in the time period, which is that these two people clearly love each other and they don't actually question that the other person has feelings for them.
It's just circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, Edward questions Eleanor's feelings for him a little bit, but mostly they know that they would be perfectly happy together if they actually had the ability to be happy together. What's holding them back from each other is not Edward really two-timing her or Eleanor not being able to express her emotions. What's holding them back from each other is Lucy Steele and the obligation Edward has to not ruin her reputation in this time period because you can't break off engagements like if you're a man in this time period.
yeah, it's not acceptable for a man to break off an engagement. If he does, it throws shade at the woman. A woman is the only one who can break an engagement without being like heavy repercussions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly, which is what makes Willoughby a rake. I think Edward is in a lot of ways the foil to Willoughby because Willoughby is not enough bound by his honor, and Edward is so bound by his honor that it ruins his life. So I think this scene does the work of creating that dynamic for us that is implicit in the books, but we in this time period don't have the right context for it.
Yeah, and I think that, like, having this conversation now affects how we can view the movie later on and view Eleanor's responses to things, like, when he gets married or when she thinks he gets married,
Mhm.
she's, like, so calm about it because they've had this conversation and, like, I wasn't watching and being like, "Eleanor, yeah!" Like I was with the book, which is what, I think is the response that a lot of people have.
Really quick, Zoe and Kelsey, I do have to say this is a huge win for me because a lot of the book was me trying to convince Molly that Edward wasn't a trash person.
Yes, and Dan Stevens' face helps too.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean,
whoosh.
drown in his eyes, why don't you?
Yeah. So then we cut to them riding to Cleveland, and Brandon helps them out of the carriage, and Marianne holds his hand for just like a moment and is like, "Thank you." And I'm like, "Ooh." And then we cut to our classic, this scene is in every movie apparently, the two sisters under the covers, or in some cases, two lovers under the covers, but they're just under the covers looking at each other by candlelight. It's very 2005 Pride and Prejudice. It's very Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And they are talking about men. And Marianne says, "What strange creatures men are. Perhaps they see us not as people, but as playthings."
I fully think that you're getting it finally, Marianne. I
Mhm.
think that there are some men who really do think that. And you were wrong to dismiss the man who doesn't think that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because she's thinking in this scene about Eliza, and I'm glad that we get to talk so much about Eliza in this movie.
The movie never forgets her, which is great.
Mhm.
Yes. Then we get Marianne walking through her hedge maze, and it starts to rain, and she runs through the rain, and she goes to the cover of the Grecian temple, and it almost looks like the exact same temple from the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, and the rain is coming down, and she's running through the woods, and she starts to look like she's a little bit lost, which I think maybe is supposed to explain why she's been gone for so long in the rain.
Yeah, there was a lot of like, it's like her thoughts, and then it kind of like escalated. And I was like, oh, she's just going to wait out the rain. And then she's like, nope, I'm just going to go through the rain some more. And I'm like, Marianne, why are you just so obsessed with like standing in the rain?
She's, like, standing, like, chest bared up to the sky, like, looking at the rain coming down on her face. I was like, "This is a little bit much." And it cuts to the house, and Brandon, like, runs in to the room where everyone's hanging out, and he's like, "Where's Marianne?" And Mr. Palmer's like, "Oh, she's gone out walking. Who knows where she is now?" And so Brandon, like, runs out to his horse, and he's looking for her, and it's, like, flashing back and forth between him looking and her standing in the rain, and it looks like lightning's about to strike her. And we flash back to Willoughby and Allenham, and when he was like walking up the stairs and their hands almost touching on the banister, lightning flash. It's just quite a lot all at once, very
Uh-huh.
dramatic.
Mhm.
Then we see a long shot of her standing like on a field, and there's a tree there, and then we cut to Brandon riding and he's screaming her name, and then we cut back to the tree, but there's no Marianne, and it's like, where'd she go? And then Brandon sees her lying crumpled on the ground in the rain, and he scoops her up and he brings her back, and he's like, we have to make a fire in her room, and then he's like, she must be stripped and chafed all over, and he starts taking off her clothes.
And then like Eleanor's like, and he's like, right, you do that.
You do that, I'm gonna go out here.
Did he? I thought he maybe I'm mixing it up with something else I watched or read recently, but I really thought he was like, "Oh yeah, I shouldn't be doing this." But did Eleanor?
I think he did, but he did that because like Eleanor and somebody else was like in the room, like trying to help, and then he would like start to take over, and then he like looked up and he was like, maybe I shouldn't be the one doing this.
In my brain, it was sort of like that's what he did to Eliza 1.0
Mm.
when she was when he found her in the poorhouse and he was like, inhibition's gone, she's dying, I gotta save her.
Mhm.
And in that situation, he really is the only person there, but he remembers here, like, oh, there are other people.
Yes.
Right.
No, but I liked it in a moment too because it was almost like he was so intent on getting Marianne well and, like, helping her and, like,
Mhm.
being the hero that it took him a moment to be like, "Oh, there are other people here." Like, it just like, for me, I thought it was fine because I just thought it was just, like, the intensity of the moment, and he's, like, so in such concern, and then it
Yes.
was more like they didn't have to push him away, it was just more like, "Oh, I can leave this to you. I'll go do this other thing," to
Yeah, she also, like, seemed to, like, wake up a little bit and look at him, and he was like, "Oh, if she's not unconscious, this is super improper,"
Yeah.
and then he, like, excused himself, but I he was such a hero in this moment and also so hot.
Also, once again, plagiarizing pretty much exactly from the 95 because Colonel Brendan does not carry her through the rain in the book. So
What happens in the book again? Because that's all I can see now.
she goes walking in the rain. She comes back. She's got a little cold,
Oh,
and everyone's like, "Oh, she's fine." And Brendan's like, "Is she fine?" And then she turns out to not be
we
fine.
just really need the high drama.
Well, of course, because, or as a modern day person, we can't understand why someone would get vastly ill from a simple walk in the rain, because that's not drama enough. They need to be soaking wet and like passed out on the ground. And then we can understand why they got so deathly ill.
Yeah. Shouts to Jane Austen for her Bronte moment here.
Mhm.
Totally. So later, Eleanor comes down and she tells Brandon that she's a little recovered and that she asked to see him. So he comes in and he takes her hands and then she takes her hand away and puts it on top of his hand. And then he does this little smile and is very sweet and she falls asleep holding his hands. And then they're downstairs again. Mrs. Jennings is like, it's just a chill, cheer up, it's okay. It's just a little cold. Which it's totally not because that night Marianne gets a fever and we get this shot of her eye and him, the doctor, like, looking in her eye and her pupil dilating while he's looking at her, and it's very spooky and a very cool shot, and the doctor is like, "Her lungs are congested, it has a putrid tendency," which means it's, like, rapidly getting worse, and Eleanor then, like, goes to Brandon and she's like, "Send a man to fetch our mother," and he's like, "I'll go myself right now." Which is, our peak Brandon moment, in my opinion. Then we get Eleanor sitting over Marianne and crying, and honestly, like, yes, the scene no, I'm not gonna never mind, not gonna compare
Yeah,
'em.
no, no, no.
Not
We
gonna
cannot compare these 2 scenes
I
because
will
'cause they're
not
both
compare these 2
wonderful.
scenes. I know Becca would come for me if I even tried, but in this one, it hits me very hard because she is so young and because she's all by herself in the room with Marianne, this also in this version is the first time we really see Eleanor cry because before she was just, like, tearing up as opposed to, like, really breaking down, like, it was a breakdown for her, but this is the first time we see her sobbing, and it's just so sad.
To me, I think the thing that really gets me about the scene and, the woman who plays Eleanor, her performance in the scene is the way frantically trying to cool Marianne down
Mhm.
while she's wiping away the tears as if, like, she's panicking, but she's not letting it all, like, out at the time. It's just that she's in so much pain here and she's so scared that the tears are falling while she's doing things, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
It is really sad. Like, I honestly was, like, very concerned for her and, like, poor Eleanor, like, I really felt that emotion there, and I just was like and again, I saw it's just, like, she's crying because she's panicking, and she's just trying so hard, and nothing is working, and she's like, "I don't know what else I can do."
Yeah. So in the middle of the night, Eleanor wakes up and sees that Marianne is just very still, and you see this, like, panic on her face, like, "Oh my god, is she dead?" And then Marianne takes a deep breath, and Eleanor is so relieved, and she runs over to her, and she kisses her hand, and Marianne goes, "Eleanor?" And then Eleanor just bursts into tears of relief, and it's so beautiful and so relieving. And we cut to Eleanor reading to Marianne from a book, and a servant comes and says, "There's a gentleman asking for you." And who is it but John Willoughby
Of Eleanor,
of Allenham.
Ugh.
John Willoughby of Allenham.
formerly of Eleanor.
John Willoughby, formerly of Allenham. That would be a very good, like, button or t-shirt.
Save it in the thoughts pile for when you need merch.
Yeah. He's downstairs and Eleanor comes down and she's like, "I don't have time for this," which I really love. She's like, "Please go away." And he's like, "I really want your forgiveness." And she's like, "You're not welcome here." And he's like, "Okay, well, let me just talk to you anyway." And this whole thing is very like confrontational and not at all like I can't sympathize with him at all.
I was so Eleanor in this moment. Like, me, Zoe, sitting watching this was like, I also don't have time for this. Like, I literally like, my note from this is, "The pacing is so slow. Why is Willoughby here? I don't care anymore." Like, I was just like, "I really don't care. I don't need to see him grovel. I don't need him at all anymore in this story." Like, I really felt like this scene was a miss. And maybe it's in the book, but I just felt like it was not necessary for this
It
adaptation.
wasn't even a grovel. It was like, "Aren't I punished enough?" He's like, "I'm forced to be married to this woman who, like, I really don't like for her money." And I'm just like, "Who cares? Go away."
Yeah.
Yeah, it was gross. I think that, like, they honestly, the fact that you had that response, Zoe, I love because I think that they hit the nail on the head with it, which is, like, everything that you said. We're done with him in this story, but he's trying so hard to, like, weasel his way back in, and I think that, like, the response is, "Ugh, I don't care anymore," and I liked how they did it because everything that came out of his mouth was slimy when he said a circumstance occurred when he was talking about Eliza, and
Mhm.
Eleanor goes, "A circumstance?" in the exact tone that you would say, like, "Are you
Yeah.
fucking kidding me?" Um, it was really on point for me,
Fair enough.
and Marianne hears them yelling at each other, and she, like, is watching from above.
I thought that was a weird choice too, but I don't know, maybe that's
That
also
was a
a
weird choice.
book thing, but I was like, "Mm."
Mm-mm.
That's not a book thing.
No, that was weird, although I was proud of Marianne for not running down the stairs and being like, "Willoughby."
Mhm.
I was like, I think maybe they put her there to make it sense of like, because we've seen her like more interested in Colonel Brandon. So I think having her like overseeing this is really more her like, I need to be done with him. Like, I feel okay concentrating on this man who actually like tried to save my life and like went to fetch my mother. And this guy's over here like, woe is me. Feel sorry for me.
Mhm.
I don't know, she didn't need to be in that scene.
No, I don't think she did. I think I agree with you though. It was kind of slow and I'm like, I don't know what this is. Can we get going here?
So in the book, this scene is Willoughby like rides through the night when he hears Marianne is on her deathbed from like John Middleton, and
Mm.
he like needs to know she's alive, and then ends up explaining himself to Eleanor in sort of a slightly like desperate like delirium. So it's sort of getting Willoughby's side of the story, and I don't think this adaptation is interested as much in Willoughby's side of the story
Right.
and more interested in giving us catharsis of letting Eleanor yell at him.
Totally.
Fair.
Yeah, I appreciated that she also was having none of it, but it was I think, like, it could have been left on the cutting room floor. Like, I don't think it added anything to the series, but, I we all took something different away from it.
Yeah. I think what I did find I agree with everybody that Marianne watching is a little bit weird. I think that that's something for the modern reader. I felt like it was for me because reading the book, Eleanor doesn't tell Marianne right away that Willoughby actually loved her. It's, like, left up to Eleanor to, like, ruminate on, to be like, "Do I want Marianne to know that he really loved her, or do I want her to think that he's just a slime ball and so she can get over him faster?" And it's kind of an unnecessary plot line, but it's like Eleanor's honor and everything is in question there, and she ends up telling her a while later when Marianne's had some time to grow and, like, be okay again. But it's just, like, it is I think it's good for a movie or, like, a series to have Marianne just know right away, so and, like, also see how slimy he is, but the scene is, like yeah, it's like it doesn't need to be there. What really needs to happen is what happens next, which is Mrs. Dashwood comes home and Eleanor runs out and she's like, she's okay," and everyone is so relieved, and they run in and are hugging and everyone's happy again. And we have Mrs. Dashwood and Marianne snuggling, and Mrs. Dashwood saying she can't believe it. They all believed Willoughby was good, and Marianne's like, "He deceived himself. He wanted to believe his own words." And she's got her growth.
And then she just tells her growth in the carriage in the next
Yep.
scene.
They're riding home, and Marianne says, "I think Colonel Brandon is an exceptional man. He was faithful to his first love. He's the true romantic. It is not what we say or feel that makes us who we are, but what we do or fail to do."
Ugh, Marianne, you finally figured it out. Good girl.
She figured it out.
I don't know. I mean, I'm happy for her and everything, but I was just a little bit like, "All right, Marianne, gosh, being 17 is a thing, isn't
Being
it?"
17 is so hard.
I actually agree with Zoe on this scene. I think it's very on the nose.
Oh, yeah, totally. I said it in a sing-song voice because it was very like, "All right, we got it, though. We got it already." So, we get back to Barton, and Margaret runs up to them, and she's like, "Guess what? I know all the kings and queens now." And I love her. Mrs. Dashwood is watching Brandon and Marianne saying goodbye, and she goes, "Why is he saying goodbye when he has the advantage now?" And Elinor says she's heard that all the great horse tamers do it. 9 times out of 10, the wild horse will follow when you leave. And I'm like, "All right, Marianne is not a horse, guys."
I actually loved that. I mean, I feel like it is an animal thing. Like a lot of animals though do like, startle easily and they are more likely to trust you when you kind of like, come in and then take your leave.
Yeah.
If you walk away from a cat before the cat walks away from you, it will be like, huh, that was weird. And I don't know. And as a horse person, Kelsey and I both did horses
Yeah.
professionally.
We're horse people, so it made sense to us.
But I also, yeah, we don't need to necessarily, equate humans to animals. But I got it.
No, yeah, I didn't hate it. I thought it was a little bit funny.
Yeah.
While we're watching them, there's the whole thing with the horse that she had been gifted before, like,
Queen Mab.
That was such a cute horse. I wanted it.
Me too. I was like, why can't someone buy me a horse as a present?
I mean, if you're willing to date Willoughby, then you get the like reward of the horse for like the month, and then you get the almost dying in the rain for all the time after.
Well, there you go.
So then we cut to Eleanor and Marianne standing on the cliffs and talking about their feelings. And the shot is so good because they are standing there and it's a shot from behind and their dresses are just like floofing up. So their butts are just like ginormous. And it's so funny. The whole conversation, their dresses are just big balloons on their butts. And they're just talking. Marianne says Colonel Brandon promised her that she can come play his piano forte anytime. And then they cut to her coming to play his piano forte.
Yeah.
Wink, wink. But he like leaves her in the library to explore on her own. And he's like, come find me later. And it was like very gentlemanly because he didn't want to like be in a room alone with her for too long, which I thought was very sweet. I also noted her new scarf. She let go of the Willoughby scarf and got a new one. So good for her.
I noted the giant bowl of peaches and strawberries that was in this room, neither of which looked particularly ripe. Like the strawberries, especially, were like very white. But I thought this was really funny because there was just like a really big bowl of peaches and strawberries in the library.
That is so funny because in the first episode, Elinor says to Margaret, don't worry, we're going to go have a picnic at Colonel Brandon's estate tomorrow. And he has fresh peaches and strawberries on his property from the greenhouse.
Okay,
Oh.
well, I didn't catch that line.
I didn't know that either. That's a little minute detail. Like I love it when they are very consistent.
Okay, so that's way more interesting to me now because otherwise I thought just like, what is this massive bowl of peaches and strawberries that was like in every shot as she walked around the library?
This is
so good.
so funny. This is why a deep dive watch is fun because we can piece together different details and learn, oh, that was actually an interesting choice.
Yes.
That was a particular choice. That was a actual choice. Like
Mhm.
Yeah.
secret for those who actually pay attention. And then there's me who's like, there was a bowl of peaches and strawberries.
Yeah, I didn't notice the bowl of peaches and strawberries, so I'm so glad that it was there and that you brought it up.
I couldn't look away.
So she's playing the piano, and we get this little montage of Brandon letting a bird fly free, which is very symbolic. And then he catches the bird again, and Marianne is standing with him all of a sudden, and he lets her pet the bird, and we can see them falling in love. And then we cut to
Before we go off this scene, this is the same piece that he gave her the first time they met.
Oh,
And she couldn't play it before, and before they
oh,
had a montage of him with the dead birds,
oh,
and his dog,
oh my
and she was
god.
struggling to play the piece, and now
Wow.
she can play it through,
And the bird's
and he's
alive.
hanging out with a live
And
bird.
alive. Bird's alive. Oh my god.
Oh,
Wow.
man.
Brilliant. Love it. It's so sappy
Symbolism.
and so on the nose, but it's so good. Wow. Then we cut to Eleanor and Marianne walking back toward the house, and they run into their servant Thomas. And he's like, "Oh, by the way, Mrs. Ferrars sends her regards. Miss Lucy Steele, as was." And Eleanor is like, and then Marianne is like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And Eleanor's like, "Nope, it's just as we expected. This isn't a surprise. And in a little while, it'll be as if nothing has ever happened." And that was the moment where I was like, okay, well, because they had that conversation, I feel a little bit less angry at her for letting this go so easily.
Mhm.
And we get this Eleanor moving on montage where she's sitting on the cliffs and painting, wandering around collecting fish. She changes the painting of Norland on the wall that she's done to a painting of Barton. She prepares some foods. Then Mrs. Dashwood is like, "Are you okay?" And Eleanor's like, "I'm perfectly contented." And then we cut to her looking out over the water on a bench, staring at the sea. And then this scene, this I don't know what to do with this, but here it comes. Eleanor and Marianne in their room that night, and Marianne says, "Colonel Brandon has proposed to me, and I have said yes." Now, what? I don't know why they did this.
I know that seemed really abrupt to me. Like it was like, okay, like her feelings towards him are growing. Like, okay, great. And then she's like, nope, getting married.
Yeah. In the book, it takes about like 2 years
2 years.
for them to get engaged after it's like in the epilogue. So I was like, I think it's because Marianne and Brandon are such a big part of the story. They wanted it to be resolved, but I don't know. Eleanor's like, "Well, you shouldn't marry him out of gratitude." And Marianne's like, "Well, no, I really love him. My feelings for him have really changed." And I do think that we got to see that, and it's a very sweet moment where they, like, hug, and Eleanor's happy for Marianne, and Marianne is like, "You need to be this happy too." And Eleanor's like, "Well, I'll find a colonel one day." But I just don't know why they did it.
Yeah, I like it better when Marianne has time to work on herself, but I actually think it's because they wanna arc the whole story around Eleanor and Edward, and they want the story to end with
Sure.
Eleanor finally being happy when everything else is resolved.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It did seem really abrupt though, I will say. Like it just like it felt a little bit like not a particularly satisfying resolution to that just because of how quickly it all happened. Yeah, I wasn't as big of a fan of that kind of the way that they wrapped that one up.
Yeah. To play the devil's advocate of my own point, it's different from the resolution of the book in that in the book, what really got me in the end, that was what Becca described to me, is that Marianne and Eleanor switched places, and Eleanor ended up with the whirlwind romance that's forbidden love and all this, and Marianne ended up with like the slow and steady whatever. This I think keeps Marianne at a, like, high level romantic, like, she's like, I'm in love now." Like, she feels her feelings really fast, and, like, she doesn't change how she operates to be with Brandon, and I think maybe that is what they're going for, is that, like, she can stay who she is and he accepts her for that. I get, which is fine. It's not how the book ends, and, not how I think Marianne's arc should end, but, like,
Yeah.
I get it, I guess. So, yeah. So, okay, how this one ends, though, is that then Edward arrives and Margaret runs inside. And oh, I had to just say here, before we get to the actual end of this book, so many of our listeners wrote in when we talked about the doors in the cottage being really low. Um, and and I learned what this actually is for. In a seaside area where there's a lot of drafts, lower doors keep the heat in better. So there's
Oh.
less room for the wind and the sand and the air to come in, and that's why all the doors are so low.
Oh, interesting. That's a fun fact. I love fun facts.
Once again, very, very, interesting detail there.
Yeah, so, like, if you're heating a room with a fire, there's less room for the heat to escape.
Well, that makes sense because heat rises and then, you've got the door blocking it. So instead of just like blooping out the doorway, it's like it gets trapped.
Right. So it just reminded me in this scene because Margaret runs inside and the door is Margaret sized and she's 8. So, she runs inside. She's like, "Edward's here. Edward's here." They rush to get ready. They go in the living room. Edward arrives and they're like, "We wish you joy." And he's like, thank you." And Eleanor is like, "Is Mrs. Ferrars in town?" And he's like, "My mother? No." And she's like, "I meant Mrs. Edward Ferrars." And he's like, "Surely you mean Mrs. Robert Ferrars." And I wanna take a screenshot of all of their faces because it's just a shot of all of the women standing there, like, with their mouths hanging open, like, "What are you talking about?" And then Margaret loudly goes, "So now you can marry Eleanor," which is phenomenal.
Peak.
Peak
Yes.
Margaret, Meg. Eleanor just runs out of the room. Edward chases her out. She starts panicking and she's putting her apron back on and just, like, trying to process.
I know, I love it. She's like, "I gotta go do something with my hands. I got a kitchen."
Yeah, because she has spent so much time trying to be okay with not ending up with him, so she's trying to get back on the level.
She's in full shock mode. She's in full, like, "I don't know what to do with this situation" mode, but yeah, I love it because she's full on, like, she just, like, abruptly leaves the room, abruptly walks away, and then she's like, "I can't deal with this. I got a kitchen." I just
Yeah,
love it.
she's like, I must just chop stuff." So she goes into she's doing that, and he's going on about how he loved her the whole time, and then I wrote down the whole quote because I loved his proposal. He says, "I think you were puzzled and hurt by my lack of openness with you. Let me be open now. Ever since I first saw you, my love for you has grown. I know I have no right to hope, but I must ask, can you forgive me? Can you love me? Will you marry me?" Ah,
Ugh, I have my note here and I just wrote, "Damn, Dan Stevens is so good."
he's so good.
Because he really is.
He could have murdered a man earlier in this movie and said this line, and we would all be like, "Oh,
Yep.
Yeah, pretty
Yes.
much.
Yeah, and the answer would have been yes. Yes, I'll
Of
marry
course I
you.
will.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
She laughs and then she giggles and then she hugs him and they have their moment and then they kiss and then it spins around them like and you're like, is there gonna be a montage while we spin? But no, it's just spinning around them for a while and they're kissing and it's beautiful. And then it cuts to Marianne and Brandon's wedding day and he carries her over the threshold of Delaford. And then we see Eleanor and
Her chickens.
Yeah.
we see Eleanor and Edward with their chickens in their quiet country parish, which is what he said. He was like, "A quiet country parish it is then with chickens."
And that's all she wanted too.
It's a quiet country manor. It looks
Yeah, for
beautiful.
sure.
I will take it. No problem, especially the chickens.
Yes, the chickens. I said with chickens, and yes, I am sobbing, and that's my last note. I was weeping openly at the end of this.
I mean, I know we're at the end, but I have to go back to the kiss for just a second because she initiates the kiss and she kisses like she has kissed many times before. And I just
She
had
sure does.
I had a little moment where I was like, just don't think Eleanor's been kissed before. Like and so I felt like that was a little bit much. Like maybe if he had initiated and she had responded, it would have felt more genuine to me in that moment. But I mean it was a great kiss.
I think maybe we've just read too many like first kiss scenes about like our main characters, that first kiss, and especially when the woman has never been kissed before. And it's like she started out untutored, but quickly she caught on and she was swept away when his like tongue licked to the seam of her lips and she opened to him. Like we've just read too many of those. So for them to just like mash, we're like, nope, there needs to be more build here. And it's the climax.
Yeah, the kiss is very like it's 2008. I felt like we wouldn't have kissed. I mean, there's always a kiss in the movie when they would definitely not even be kissing in the book before they were married. But well, they would have, but not in this moment. Eleanor wouldn't be.
Yeah.
It was just it's 2008, so we're as I said when I watched this, I said it's 2008, so we're having sex.
absolutely." So, two things on this point. One, Zoe, I must recommend this to you because this was sent to us after the 95 watch and it made my entire life. There's a deleted scene from the 1995 where Edward and Eleanor kiss for the first time. And in that one, not to give too much away, but that is an Edward initiated kiss after engagement.
Ooh.
And it's Hugh Grant.
And it's Hugh Grant and it's perfect.
Ah.
It's perfect. It's a perfect scene. It's so good. They're both so in character and there is that sort of like she's shocked. She doesn't know what's happening, but then she sort of like gets into it moment. It's so good.
It's really good.
I'll have to check that out.
Yes. And number two, I love that you guys went straight to like the beauty of that first romantic kiss when a woman has not been kissed before, when you noted that it was her first kiss, honest to God, the first thing that came to my mind was that viral video from years ago where it was a wedding where neither party had kissed before the wedding day.
Oh my god.
I do not remember this video.
Oh my god. It's like no shame to anyone's practices. Like if you don't want to kiss before you're married or you don't want to kiss ever, that's fine. But this video is like these two people who've never kissed anybody before and their first kiss is at the altar and viscerally it's like you see how bad the kiss is. Like
Oh.
it's horrible. And I pictured Dan Stevens and this very beautiful actress going in for that kiss, and I am losing my
Yeah, no.
mind.
I'm not saying that's what I want. I'm just saying it seemed very practiced, and it was a beautiful kiss.
Yes. They're beautiful people kissing. I won't totally complain, but you are totally right that it would be different. But that is the end of the episode. We have Becca's study questions at the end of every movie watch. First question is best line delivery.
So we talked about this in one of the other episodes, but it was it was when she said 7 years at a great school in town, and that's all we have to show for it. Poor Charlotte.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
believe that was
mhm.
Mrs. Jennings. I think that was my favorite one.
That was absolutely one of my favorites as well.
Mine was as I mentioned, it was the scene with, when Elinor is like, "Do you not think I haven't been suffering this whole time?" Like, that to me was just perfect because it was, like, just the right amount of emotion. It was, like, the emotion of someone who's not used to sharing their feelings, like, but just, like, they just can't believe the absurdity of their sister just, like, fully thinking that they're not, like, having complete emotional turmoil right now because they're not showcasing it, like, it just was, like to me, that was just a perfect delivery, and I was like, "I feel you, Eleanor."
Mhm. I'm torn between Edward's proposal because it's so good
Mhm.
and Anne saying, "I'm sorry, it just popped out."
It's such a good one.
Kelsey, I totally agree with you that when she says, "But believe me, I have been very unhappy" at the end of that speech, that is not only the best line delivery for me, but for me, that's probably my favorite speech in the book as well. So it's a perfectly written speech. But for the sake of having a separate quote, I will also give it to Robert Ferrers for my brother has spoken very highly of your beauty. He is generally a very poor judge of these things, but in this instance, I have to concur.
That's a good one.
All right, next one is notable differences from the book.
I've never read this book before, like, and honestly, I haven't watched the 1995 Sense and Sensibility in quite a long time, so I got nothing.
I think I raised my questions throughout the recording of like, was this in the book? So like I think like I was intuiting maybe what was and what wasn't in the book because it felt like this adaptation was maybe going for something a little bit closer to the book and also with its own interpretation on that. But yeah, I'll cede the floor to you guys.
Yes, I mean, for one, it's clearly like the kissing is not in the books. Um,
I think the biggest difference, at least in this half, the rate at which Marianne gets over Willoughby because she witnesses the conversation between Willoughby and Elinor and then immediately falls in love with Brandon and then immediately gets married to him. And so that I think it undermines her character a little bit, but I'm not upset about it. Like I still liked watching it happen.
Yeah.
so for me, my forever and always gripe with the story is I want Lucy to be more evil.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
She's more evil in this than she is in 95, but I want her to be a vicious, calculating, maniacal villain. And
Yeah.
also, I would say probably making Willoughby even a little more evil. Oh, and getting to see Eliza as well
Mm,
as
mhm.
part of making Willoughby more evil. Because this adaptation is much more interested in it, observing him as a real true villain than it is in giving him the opportunity to explain.
Yeah.
So, worst moment.
So for me, I wrote my least favorite part was, perhaps just the lack of Alan Rickman, uh, in the whole thing. But no, I said, I really didn't like the scene of Marianne and Willoughby at his house and then the recap of it. But really generally, I think the pacing. I thought that the pacing of this whole miniseries was very slow. I've watched a lot of British TV. I understand that that tends to be the to skew towards that in this style maybe of filmmaking. However, I just found it very slow. And I've watched the Pride and Prejudice by the same, director team, and I did not find it that way at all. So I thought that that was interesting because I found this to be really slow, and I think that that made it more difficult for me to enjoy.
That's fair, and I think to your point about Pride and Prejudice, I do think the Pride and Prejudice is also slow, but there's a big and notable difference, which is that in the Pride and Prejudice, there is a ton of the humor injected
Mhm.
into it from the book, which is a very funny book, whereas Emma Thompson's adaptation of Sense and Sensibility injects a lot of wit, and this one is much more focused on the more serious aspects of the plot than it is on the little witticisms, and the witticisms, when they're there, shine,
Yeah,
but it's not as popped in comedy as some of the other Jane Austen material out there, if that makes sense.
definitely.
Yeah. So I think I and granted, like, I think I just hated, and it just because it just was so cringy, was when Marianne's, like, yelling after Willoughby and, like, making a scene in the ball, and I'm just like, I understand. I'm just like, "Marianne, no. Marianne, no. Marianne, keep it together." Oh my god. Like, to me, like, I understand why they did that, but to me, it just was like, oh, it just was, like, so cringy, and I just, like, was like, "This could have been done better and, like, still had the same amount of drama," but I'm just like, "This would never have happened," like,
Did it happen in the book? Because it does happen in the 95 version.
Yeah, and it happens in the book too.
yeah, so I guess it's part of the book, but, like, I don't know, I guess that's just my least favorite scene just because I guess it's just the cringiness of
It's very cringy.
it.
It's you feel so like you just want her to stop. I agree with you.
I wanted to, like, leave the room, like, sometimes when there's, like, a cringe moment in a show or a movie, I'm like, "I just need to leave, like, I can't watch this, I'm just cringing so bad, I'm like, I can't be a part of this."
Totally. I think I have to agree with Zoe, and not necessarily like the pacing of the whole thing, although it is weird. Like in certain moments, it's very like back and forth, fast paced with like uh we're having flashbacks. We're going from this moment to this moment, back to this moment, like with the duel. They're like flashing back in between the duel and everything. I thought what was weirdest about the pacing is like what they chose to omit and what they chose to add and, like, how much time they chose to spend on those things. Like, the fact that they didn't show Eleanor and Brandon having the conversation where he asks her to talk to Edward, or the fact that they didn't show Marianne finding out that Lucy and Eleanor or Lucy and Lucy and Eleanor would be an interesting pairing. Lucy and Edward are engaged, like, those conversations that I feel like are kind of integral to the plot, they only showed the reactions to them. I just thought that was a little bit weird, but I wasn't mad about it necessarily. Overall, I think I freaking loved this adaptation, so I don't have a lot of gripes with it. I'm kind of like scraping for him, but that was something I was like, "Why did you spend so much time on the duel and no time on Eleanor and Brennan's friendship in the second half?"
Yeah, I think there were some hit or misses as far as, like, what they chose to focus on versus what they chose to showcase, and I do agree that lends a lot of it to the pace.
Mhm.
My least favorite moment in this is the duel. It's just very
Oh,
dramatic.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It is such a weird little foray into the, into, a heightened, super contemporary world for a second. I actually kind of feel the same way about the sex scene at the beginning
Yes.
of
Yeah.
it as well.
Mhm.
Like, I feel like both of those scenes just really pull me out of the story in general. But I think generally I'm with Molly in terms of generally enjoying a lot about this, so it doesn't bug me to my wit's end that this exists.
Do you know how long it took me to realize what the sex scene at the beginning was about? Because, like, I was like, all of a sudden this is happening, and then I was, like, watching it, and I was like, "What did I watch at the beginning of this? Like, why did I watch that?" Like, I don't understand.
I thought it was an interesting choice to have that in there because I felt like they set this really steamy tone, and then there was almost nothing steamy until, like, the end again. So it felt very jarring in a way because 'cause you're like, "Whoa, this is what we're watching," but then you weren't watching that.
I agree, like, it was, like, all of a sudden, it was, like, really intensive, and I'm like, "I'm ready for some intensity, like, let's do it," and then, like you said, and then all of a sudden the pace, like, slowed way the hell down,
Yeah.
and, like, it changed tone completely.
Yes, absolutely. All right, now favorite moment from the episode, I should say.
I think I can be quick again because I think my favorite moment was the few moments of Dan Stevens. I felt like he actually did not have a ton of screen time, but anytime he was on screen, he just absolutely lit it up, and just like brought a different energy to the role. Again, I'm not 100% positive it's the right Edward energy, but man, he's so charismatic and there's just you look at him and he's just such a star, and, like, you can't take your eyes away from him.
I think I've already discussed my favorite is that sister moment. Like, I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
gonna like, when I think of this adaptation, that's all I wanna think about is just that sister moment.
The Edward and Eleanor moments in this half were really beautiful for me. The one where they're talking about their feelings at long last, and she says, "I wouldn't have thought so highly of you if you had acted differently." That was, so good, and then also his proposal, I wept.
I am gonna just have to agree with Kelsey. I love the Eleanor and Marianne scene. It's so pivotal for me. So we're gonna do this. This is something we should just generally do, I think, when we cover adaptations. Let's give a 3 sentence summary of how we felt about this movie or just overall thoughts on the movie. Does that make sense as a way to do it?
Sure, I'll do my best.
It does not have to be 3 sentences.
Oh, you can rant. We are totally a safe space for ranting. We appreciate it when our guests don't like the content that we're watching or listening to,
I
or
love when our guests don't like the content.
because it creates so many better conversations when people disagree with us.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I thought it was fine. Like, I definitely think that of, like, Jane Austen adaptations, like, I really, liked the 1995, Sense and Sensibility, so I really did enjoy that. And I will say, like, I'm always a big fan of a miniseries, but I think, like, agree in the sense of, like, the pacing was just kind of off for me. Like, at the same time too, though, Dan Stevens, like, I did think there was, like, really good moments, and that's really what, like, helped me, like, keep going through it. So, like, I feel good having watched it. I didn't regret watching it. Am I going to watch it again? Probably not, unless I really need to take that much time out of my life.
So, I, really did not enjoy this adaptation at all. I found very little of it to grab my attention because of the pacing. I thought the pacing was dismal. I really also thought that the casting was and the writing choices was simply fine. And I think what you touched on a little bit about the witticisms was lost for me, just because it felt very one note with a few spots in there. I think that, I think there was talent in the cast, but unfortunately, like, I'm sorry, this is not 3 sentences. But unfortunately, like when I look at it compared to the dynamics that you got from the 95 cast, it paled in comparison, and I know it was trying to do something else, but it did not resonate with me what they were trying to do. I felt relief that it was over. I was just like, "Oh, thank God." Like, I really could just, like, couldn't be bothered with it anymore. I found very little that connected with me in this one. It felt to me like it was a lot about Marianne, and I don't think Marianne's the most interesting character at all, and I also didn't think this actress as Marianne brought all of the things that I think she could've to Marianne. Like, I think Mar I preferred Kate Winslet's Marianne. I thought she's more kind of fluttery and, like, all over the place, and this one, I don't know, she was good, but
Very dramatic.
I don't know, it didn't connect with me again. So I felt like my note here was, "And I'm about Marianne, especially this Marianne." So I just like I just it didn't work for me.
That's fair, and I'll say this much, we didn't talk about it so much during, the read through of the book, and this is, generally a more book accurate adaptation, but, there is a contingent of Jane Austen fans who find Sense and Sensibility to be drab and be a little bit less, fun and witty than her other books and find the love interest lacking. I personally like it the best for a lot of reasons. It's my favorite book, but because it's like very sister focused and I'm just a sucker for sisters tales
Mhm.
generally and seaside tales, but that's a different story. Um so I think that it is really fair to find Sense and Sensibility, especially this adaptation, not to your taste. It might not be for everyone, and the Emma Thompson one certainly is much more universal in a lot of ways. So that being said, my take on this one is that I really like it. I think it is a very close adaptation of the book in a lot of ways. And I think it's not trying to be the 1995, which I appreciate because I
Yes.
don't think anybody could capture the magic of that movie with its cast and its
I agree.
um
I agree.
its story. So I appreciate that it's doing something different. And I found this one a lot later in life and I think what I appreciate about it is that it goes a little bit more high drama. It gives me the story in a new fashion. And as someone who loves this story, I'll take it in any fashion. But I don't think it's totally, I don't think it's objectively better than the 95.
I've been mulling over what Zoe said about this one focusing more on Marianne and Marianne being the least interesting character because I agree that I don't think All right, maybe I'm just being controversial to be controversial now, but
Go for it.
I don't think that Elinor or Marianne are the most exciting characters in this story. I think Colonel Brandon's the most exciting character in this story, and we just don't
Yes.
get enough of him ever.
I think that's totally fair because I felt like there was a lot going on with him and like he kept popping up and I'm like, but what's his backstory? Like, are we gonna get a flashback of Brandon? Like,
We needed what we should have had. All right, this is what I need is a flashback. Since this one is so into flashbacks, what we really needed is a flashback of Brandon and Eliza and their love story. Like, because this Brandon, like, yes, okay, I think that he is handsome. However, his storytelling was not as awkward as Colonel Brandon should be, but it also wasn't captivating enough to be like captivating, so like when he was telling the story about Eliza, it was just a little bit over dramatic. So I think like one big takeaway from this adaptation, which I did thoroughly enjoy, is that like there were moments where it was just too over dramatic for me to take seriously, and most of those moments were Brandon being too intense.
Heartbreaking for my boyfriend who loves this actor from The Walking Dead, but
Yeah, well, no, I still love him. I still love his Brandon. I still love Alan Rickman's Brandon. I Brandon could literally be anyone, and I would be like, yes, because he's a perfect character. And I love his story, and I love his growth, and I love just everything about him. So yes, but my overall takeaway is that I did love this adaptation. I love both adaptations. I think that I liked this Eleanor more overall, and she does tend to carry the story. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
So at the beginning of this, you guys asked us if we had a hot take, and I didn't know what a hot take was. But I do have a hot take now. And that hot take is that I think that Dan Stevens would have made a better Willoughby than an Edward. Because I
Ooh.
think
oh.
that if he had been cast as this particular Willoughby, it would have been way more heartbreaking and way more like hard for us to let go of him like Marianne. And I think
Mm.
also he would have brought a lot to that role. I think Dan Stevens is a super interesting actor, which I won't go into here, but like that's my hot take. Like I think he would have been right as Willoughby.
I love that hot
I
take.
actually really love that hot take a lot, partially because this is also something that Jane Austen adaptations do in general. It's done in Pride and Prejudice a lot, where Wickham is supposed to be the hottest man, and part of the reason he gets away with everything is because he's super hot. And they always cast a super, super heartthrob to play Darcy, which is a problem because you're like, well, no, like if you're going to be ultra charmed by anybody, it's going to be Colin Firth in
Colin
the corner.
Firth. Ah.
But I think that this adaptation suffers from something similar. Obviously, Dominic Cooper, superstar, Mamma Mia,
Yeah.
and Howard Stark in Captain America: The First Avenger, but he doesn't play Willoughby as hot as he is generally, and Edward is not supposed to be a dreamboat. He's supposed to be kind of modest and sweet.
Mhm.
And so you have this pair of like big blue eyes staring at you and saying, "I'd like a quiet country parish." And it's like, "Oh yeah, I'm Jewish, but I'll go to a quiet country parish."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, me too. Me too.
All right. So last question here would be, who wins the episode?
Actually, this is a perfect segue because you just said it, which I wrote down Dan Stevens' eyes.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think I have to agree.
You said that, and I'm like, actually, that's so perfect because, like, I 100%. Although I will say, like, I mean, I gotta love Anne. Like,
Yeah, she was great.
Anne's great. She's so great.
It just popped out.
Absolutely. I am gonna give it to the woman playing Elinor because I think her breakdown is very effective
Totally.
in this story. So, yeah. Oh my God. This concludes our coverage of Sense and Sensibility in particular. Zoe and Kelsey, thank you so much for joining us on this extremely long journey. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
For our listeners who are wondering what's going to happen next, we are not going to go straight into Emma. You're going to get some cool other content coming down the pipeline. We will keep you updated on that. But then we will be going straight into our read of Emma. But Tea and Strumpets, do you want to tell the people where they can find you one more time?
I would love to. Yep, we're a podcast. So if you're listening to this podcast, you know where to get podcasts, and we're everywhere you can get podcasts. We're on social media at T as in Tom, N as in Nancy Strumpets. And we've got a website called romancepod.com. And again, we have a podcast where we talk about Regency romance books and other books that are adjacent to that genre. And we read a book and we talk about it. And it's a lot of fun. So we really hope you'll give us a listen.
Perfect. All right, listeners, that concludes this episode of Pod and Prejudice. Until next time, stay proper.
And find yourself a pair of Dan Stephen blue eyes.
Yes.
Great pick.
I was going to say the same thing. I think there's something else.
Pod and Prejudice is edited by Molly Burdick and audio produced by Graham Cook. Our show art is designed by Torrance Brown. Our show is transcribed by SpeechDocs Podcast Transcription. For transcripts and to learn more about our team, check out our website at podandprejudice.com. To keep up with the show, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Pod and Prejudice. If you love what you hear, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/podandprejudice to see how you can support us, or just drop us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.